point for how I want to think about Christian-Muslim relations in my own day, in my own context. And what happened to my... So I want to look at some African Muslim peacemakers in Harlem, New York. This is where I did my PhD. I continue to be a Christian-Muslim relations team leader for Eastern Mennonite Missions. The group I want to talk about, the group I am describing as a pacifist Muslim group from West Africa, was founded by Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba. Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, born in 1853, died in 1927. So just about 100 years ago, he died. He grew up in a time of violent jihad and colonial conquest in West Africa. So in his day, the French were involved in a long-term, very violent possession of West Africa. They repressed the local populations. They created feuds between different kingdoms. They funded, they employed all the tactics people still employ when they want to use oppression. They gave money and guns to both sides, all those things. He grew up in a time of violent jihad. So one of the leaders opposing the French and opposing a certain other kingdom in Senegal captured him and his family and took them on a long retreat where his sister died. One of his other relatives was kidnapped and killed. Another one lost. Another one, his mother died of illness, all because of this jihad. This deeply impacted him as a child, the violence that he experienced as a child. So here's a Muslim who was a victim of a Muslim jihad. He was harmed by this jihad. His father was a scholar and a Quranic school teacher. Ahmadou Bamba became a scholar and a writer. He traveled all through West Africa seeking knowledge as he grew up. When he became a popular teacher in Senegal, the French saw him as a threat, and they sent him into exile in the country of Gabon. He ended up spending 7 years in Gabon in very difficult physical conditions, but he survived. Eventually, the French, through requests of Senegalese leaders, allowed him to return to Senegal. And the moment when he returned to Senegal, his followers were much more numerous than when he had left. And they told him, we got the numbers now, we can fight, we can resist. And Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba said very clearly and publicly, no, I have forgiven them all for the sake of God. So he, at the end of his exile in Gabon, he said, I have forgiven the French for the sake of God. And he asked his people to go back to their farms and their homes and not fight. Shortly thereafter, he was sent into a second exile in Mauritania. Finally, he ended the rest of his life in house arrest in Senegal for 20 years. He's the founder of a very powerful group called the Mouridiyya, a Sufi Muslim group from Senegal with millions of modern-day disciples in Senegal, Europe, new communities forming in Brazil and Shanghai, China, and many other places. So, and one of their communities is in New York City. And I became an honorary member of their community in New York. What did he have to say about himself? He said, I wage my jihad. Jihad in Arabic means to struggle. The simple meaning is to struggle. I wage my jihad through knowledge and ethical values as a humble servant of God and a servant of his prophet, while others bear weapons to be feared. My sole arms are knowledge and worship. The true warrior in God's path is not he who kills his enemies, but he who combats his ego to achieve spiritual perfection. In a very popular poem that he wrote, and here's a copy of it, written in the Wolof language using Arabic script, the tiny little section that I highlighted with the white box says, being generous to all Muslims is better than waging holy war. So just a little tiny indication that he was against warfare, against jihad, violent jihad. Here now is what this community looks like in New York City today. So these are Senegalese immigrants at a barbecue in a park in New York City. Many of them are my friends. Oops, wrong direction. Here, the young men are with their Sufi sheikh. They are asking him for his blessing. So he's praying for them and they're listening. And if it works, I want to play for you a short clip of the kind of singing that this Muslim community in New York does. So this group of men gets together every Thursday night to sing the poetry written by Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba. And I was just back visiting in this very same room with them in the month of May. And I took a friend along. I'm in the middle of making a documentary film about nonviolence. And so I went and asked this group of men, what does it mean to be a Muslim in America practicing nonviolence? And one of the men in this group spoke passionately about their founder and his commitment to forgiveness and his commitment to nonviolence and refusing that his disciples would use weapons. Very convincing. So this is a real community. Whoops. And for example, here's a poster from a recent parade they did. 2015, they did an international exhibition on Muslim nonviolence, and they called their leader, Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, a Muslim peacemaker. And here's a young guy at an event, and they got those same posters up. Both posters announce a Muslim peacemaker, a Muslim peacemaker. And this is a message they want everybody to know. We are Muslims in America who follow a distinctly nonviolent, pacifist kind of Islam from Africa. And here in a parade in Harlem, New York, this guy's carrying a poster. It says Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, that's their leader, their founder, who died in 1927, is an African Muslim leader of nonviolence. So this is my last slide, and then I'll have a few comments before I end. If there's a way for people to ask questions, I'd be happy to do that. If that's not part of how the seminar works, that's okay. But when I think about a Muslim nonviolent group in America, I want to ask, what contribution do they make to American society, to my community? So I listed here the Muridiyya contributions to American conversation about Muslim immigrants. So Americans, I don't know what it's like in whatever country you live in, But in the United States, we have a lot of discussion, public and private, political leaders, community leaders, religious leaders, all debating whether it's good or bad to have Muslim immigrants enter our country. So what benefit have the Muridiyah brought to America? Well, they have a strong desire to share their cultural and religious values with others. They are very strongly committed to dawah. That means the inviting other people to Islam to become Muslims. And so this is actually something they do that creates fear for a lot of people. So there's some very positive aspects, and then there's other aspects that people say, no, I don't like that. The Muridiyah, these Senegalese immigrants, they bring a very strong work ethic. These are people that came to America with nothing. They work very hard to make a life for themselves, their families, and get educated. I'm talking now these days to many, many different young men and women who found a way to get into American university after doing American high school, and they're going to make amazing contributions to the life of our country. Specifically, what practices of nonviolence and peacemaking how do they actually put this nonviolent ethic into practice? One, I showed you pictures of their parade. They're telling everybody, and they're inviting other Muslims, there's a way to be a Muslim and promote nonviolence. They're sharing their poster series. They did a conference at a university about this. They want to educate people in their own community and outsiders. They see forgiveness as the appropriate response to violence against their community. And I have a story about that. During my field work in Harlem in 2018, during the month of Ramadan, a young man, 20 years old, went to the mosque to pray. He said it was so full, he couldn't get into the building. So he went down the street a few blocks away to another mosque, which is the Senegalese mosque. It's his normal one. But anyway, he went there, and as he got to the door, there were some young African Americans and some young Senegalese Americans fighting. And he knew some of the people. So he stepped in and tried to break up the fight. He thought everything was over. He went into the mosque and did his evening prayers. When he came out, the one African American guy was waiting for him and shot him twice in the stomach. This guy, who I interviewed, survived. And I interviewed him a few months after his shooting. I asked him, so what happened? He says, well, it's really simple. I went to the mosque to pray. I saw my friends fighting. I tried to break up the fight. I told them we shouldn't fight. I went inside. I came back outside, he said, and God allowed that I was shot. He said, and I don't want to try to find out who did it or anything. I trust that God is in control, and I don't want to do anything except get well. So I interviewed his community leaders. I interviewed the leader of the Senegalese youth movement. They call themselves the disciples of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, their founder. I interviewed the president of this youth movement. He told me, listen, we follow our leader. He forgave the French after they put him in exile in Gabon, and they thought he would die. They hoped he would die, but he survived, and he came back to Senegal, and he forgave everyone. He forgave the French. He said, if our leader suffered that much and forgave, we, his disciples, we should also be willing to suffer and forgive. It's a very powerful story about actually putting nonviolence into practice. And there are many others from their community, stories like that. Because of the peacemaking presence of this community, Harlem is a transformed place today. when they started arriving in Harlem in the early 80s and mid 80s, 1980 to 1990, Harlem was the most dangerous place in America. The police didn't go inside Harlem. The taxis didn't drive there. But because it was so dangerous, rent was very, very cheap. And these new immigrants with nothing decided to move there. They opened small businesses. They didn't fight back. They promoted family life, and they didn't use drugs. They became a transforming presence in their community. Another way they contribute to the life of the community is by their small groups. A daira is a small circle group. The word hasaid on the screen there, you see, that is the kind of singing that I showed you a little bit ago. So they create these small community groups that give people a place to belong and participate. They transform the space of their home into, or the street, wherever they're at. They try to transform their local environment into the house of the Murids, the Dar al-Muridiyah, a place where they feel and sense that they belong. And they're very committed to educating children about nonviolence. In May this year, I went and visited a school in New York City, an Islamic Quranic school, and interviewed both children and teacher about the teaching of nonviolence and good behavior, or what they call beautiful behavior. And again, quite convincing that they are dedicated to this peacemaking way of life. So if I go all the way back to the very first question, I want to reflect just a little bit. What can we learn about our own faith and about our commitment to nonviolent peacemaking in the way of Jesus? I can say that as a child or a teenager or as a young adult, I really thought Mennonites were the only ones that cared about peacemaking and nonviolence. I didn't even know anybody else existed. I was totally inside my own community. And was not aware of other faith groups who had any kind of commitment to nonviolence. So it's exciting for me to learn about this Sufi Muslim community from Senegal who are committed to nonviolence, forgiveness, and a peaceful way of relating to their neighbors. I think it's exciting. And I think they're my cousins somehow. Yeah, I would say that we're somehow spiritual cousins. And if you think about how big the Mennonite Anabaptist community is in the larger world of all the people that call themselves Christian. Okay, you got that picture? All the Christians in the world, 2.6 billion people who call themselves Christian. And there's, a few million people who call themselves Mennonite Anabaptists. We're just a tiny speck among all the Christian traditions. In very much the same way, the Murid Sufi Muslim community that I just described to you is a tiny minority community within the larger 1.8 billion plus Muslim world. So in so many surprising ways, I'm part of a minority Christian community with a witness for the larger Christian community. Please consider the way of Jesus, the peacemaking way of Jesus. Don't take up arms. Don't tell me you can be a Christian soldier. No. In a very similar way, these Murids from Senegal, now many of them living in the United States, this community I just described, they're a tiny minority in the Muslim world who says, no, Never commit violence in God's name. Forgive people that harm you. So I would love if I could interact with any of you directly. If you have a question, I don't know if you're able to ask a question. If you're not, then too bad. If you could type it into a chat box, I don't know if that works either, but anybody that's listening, you would be welcome. And that's what I prepared. I prepared a short session so that I could have interaction and dialogue with people in the Zoom meeting, but apparently that's not a real option. If you're interested, hey, there's somebody. Hi, Claire.
Hi, thank you for the session. It's very
You can
interesting.
talk to me. Awesome. Well, that's good. I didn't know that. I thought it couldn't happen.
Yeah.
Welcome. Please talk.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have too much to say, but thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about if you've had those conversations with members of the Muslim nonviolent communities that you've talked about, kind of directly talking about the maybe similarities and differences in our faith perspectives as nonviolent members of our religion. Yeah, and kind of what those conversations are like.
I've had a lot of them. I'll tell you about one of the earliest ones I had with this community in New York City. After the Friday prayers at their mosque, the imam asked me to come back to his apartment later that day, said we'd have some tea and snacks and visit. Oh no, I'm confusing it. There's two. The one I'm thinking of, sorry. The first time I met their imam, before I visited their mosque, I got his address from somebody. I talked to him on the phone. We texted back and forth. I finally found his house in Harlem. It was very hard to get into because it was like the 5th floor of an apartment building and you had to have a code to open the door. Anyway, finally got into his house. And I the normal greetings and stuff. And he's like, well, who are you? What do you? So I said, well, I'm a Mennonite. I'm part of this tradition, committed to peacemaking, committed to nonviolence. We've been part of this tradition, our church, for nearly 500 years. And I tried to describe to him who the Mennonites are. And, I even mentioned the guy I mentioned at the beginning of my speech. I'm one of the spiritual descendants of Michael Sattler. And I don't know if he followed everything I said, but guess what he did? He hugged me. Immediately, a huge hug, and said, wow, we're the same. We believe everything the same. And he hugged me. And I protested. I said, yeah, we do, but we don't. There's some real differences. And then at another event, which I started to get mixed up at, he actually had arranged for me to meet with a bunch of the leaders from their Islamic community for a very aggressive back and forth session about what Muslims believe and what Christians believe, and wouldn't I rather be a Muslim than a Christian? So a very dynamic and good discussion about, and those kind of discussions really help you get into, okay, why do I feel so deeply passionate about following Jesus? And why would I ever give that up to be a Muslim? And we've had that discussion. Those things are all open and allowed to be talked about. And yeah. So where do you live, and how did you join this particular seminar?
Well, thank you for your response. That's really interesting. So I'm currently streaming from Thailand, but I'm from the US, and just here for a couple months. So yeah, it just sounded like an interesting topic. So wanted
Nice.
to join in.
Yeah. Yeah, a few months ago, or a month ago, I did an orientation about how we're supposed to do these workshops, and I thought it was all interactive. So I prepared a short session, not an hour and a half lecture.
Yeah,